Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 21st of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information no matter what part of Alaska you're in. You can do that using Marine VHF, your NOAA weather radio, or the internet at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can find us on Facebook during the day at NWS Alaska or on Twitter, NWS Alaska there, or NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, or NWS Fairbanks. And if you use the hashtag AKwx, you can also find more people talking about more Alaska weather, even if they're not following or using the NWS Alaska accounts. During the afternoon, you've heard me talk about the daily afternoon map briefings. Those happen around 4 o'clock or so, and you'll find those on the Anchorage National Weather Service website or on YouTube. If you look for AKwx TV or AKwx, you should be able to find those map briefings there from the National Weather Service account in Anchorage there. Those are every day at 4 o'clock and give you a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about here in Alaska weather. Now, as far as what people are talking about in the interior, it's probably the wind, especially up over the peaks there. Earlier today, the Middle Tanana Valley and the Deltana and Tanana area were released from the wind advisories. That's what you see there covered in yellow. We're looking at some gusts that could come upwards of 35 to maybe 45 miles per hour at times. The strongest of winds, though, will be a little bit further up in the Koyukuk Valley around Bettles. And we're expecting those winds to be probably on the order of 45 to about 50 miles per hour. Some of that will take you in through early tomorrow morning. So gusts, especially on the ridge tops, and that'll continue through the overnight and into the early morning hours of your Saturday. Also across the central Beaufort Seacoast, as you well know, the winds are staying up there. They've diminished somewhat from their stronger version yesterday, but the conditions there still warrant a winter weather advisory that'll take you into early tomorrow morning as well. So watch for poor visibility and some stronger wind gusts generally coming from the east. And we'll talk about your winds a little bit more in the marine weather forecast toward the end of the show. Looking out toward the Bering Sea, area of low pressure still visible here across the Alaska Peninsula. It's retrograding or moving westward ever so slightly here, and it's still filling in. That means the more air it gathers in, the weaker that storm system will be. As that continues to happen, it's also mixing up a lot of the air across the Bering Sea and weakening in its strength. So a lot of the air, instead of having a big push of cold moving southward or a big push of warm moving north, it's kind of all mixing up together in a nice big ball of weather here. Northerly winds are working their way toward the central and western sections of the Aleutians, and as such, we're still getting that onshore colder flow through most of the islands, picking up some rain there and sometimes a little batch of drier weather trying to work its way in toward Adak or Atka and trying to slowly sneak toward Nikolsky there. Most of that, though, just to your west. If you look carefully to the south, all the way from Eastern Asia and Taipei and Shanghai, this river of cloud cover here is attached to the jet stream. And underneath that is that fast-moving river of air and the main corridor of weather activity that is just south of Alaska. So when you look at this chart, you don't really see that. It's just south of the Gulf of Alaska. The main corridor of that main weather feature is just out of reach of Alaska. So we're just sitting here under the control of low pressure across the Alaska Peninsula and high pressure up across the Arctic. And that ridge extends all the way down into the northern Yukon and the Northwest Territories. And that pressure gradient, or the difference between low pressure and high pressure in the north, is what's creating all that wind here across a large part of the central interior. And at times it's been fairly gusty across southeastern Alaska as well. Well, those winds have subsided somewhat, and now we get some drier air moving on, but there's still been some occasional hit and miss rain pockets moving through. Some of that has brought more rain to places like Juneau and southeast today. Out around Kodiak, pockets of heavier rainfall there. And again, around the interior, it looks like mainly dry weather as the wind whips right over the Alaska Range and through some of the lower terrain across the Alcan border. So it's an offshore flow for the west coast, Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, all the way down the southwestern coastline, and that's kept most areas relatively dry. There's been some pockets of precipitation across southwestern Alaska, closer to some of the higher terrain there. But by and large, most of the wetter weather has been right along the Gulf Coast and southwestern Alaska, down the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians, with snow and blowing snow across the Arctic coast for now, mainly east of Barrow. So here we go for today's weather map. A low pressure system there at 961 millibars. The frontal boundary that we were looking at yesterday is still moving on shore, and as it does so, it's weakening. So we kind of break that line up there into chunks, telling you that it's either forming or weakening, and in this case it's falling apart. Pockets of moderate to occasionally heavy rain there around the Juneau area and up toward Yakutat this afternoon. Rainfall continued around Portage and Whittier today, Prince William Sound, all the way down the coast to Seward, and it didn't look like a whole lot there fell around the Homer region. On Kodiak Island, it saw about another third of an inch or so, and areas down through the Alaska Peninsula and into Dutch Harbor picked up another quarter inch at times. All these black lines are troughs of low pressure. They're disturbances that are moving along the northern side of this low pressure system and on the south side of high pressure. They're not really changing the temperature. They are shifting the wind a little bit, and the pressure goes down when they pass and then rises right after it passes. And each one of those disturbances can generate some clouds and maybe some precipitation. But more than anything right now for the interior, it's helping to drive that wind pattern a little bit more. So again, some stronger winds mainly across the ridge tops across the middle sections of Alaska. Snow and blowing snow will continue for the Arctic coast as we head through tonight. Look for a lot of that to be more of an easterly flow as we go through the overnight hours and into Saturday. And again, that's going to keep that westerly or east to westerly flow up or down the west coast through tonight. Pockets of rainfall there across the southern Bering Sea coast and generally a northerly flow. But one thing to point out, and we'll talk about this when we get around to your marine maps in just a few minutes, is the sea water here is really cold. In fact, cold enough that as soon as those winds drop, if you've got some pockets of maybe slushy ice or something that isn't terribly thick, well, that should thicken up pretty quick or freeze very quickly if there's a few pockets of open water there. A lot of that's going to change very quickly once the wind shuts down. So plan on some rapid changes there if you're in the coastal sections, anywhere from especially the Bering Strait northward toward Kaktovik. Low pressure continues to fill in by Saturday, 978 millibar low now. So this number continues to rise as the pressure system gets weaker. We'll still have a northerly flow coming through the central and western chain. We'll see some pockets of rain and snow showers there generally in the west and along the mountains itself. And then along the Alaska Peninsula, rain becomes mixed with snow a little bit more as it gets over Kodiak Island and into the Cook Inlet area. The Kenai Peninsula will probably flirt with rain and snow showers throughout the day, and some of that might fall over the Anchorage area, but most likely most of this Susitna Valley will stay pretty dry. As you look into the Copper River Basin and into southeast, most of the snow showers there will be at higher elevations. Coastal areas and low-lying terrain will likely be looking at rainfall throughout the day. And again, we have plenty of these black lines all over the map indicating a change in the wind direction and the pressure and maybe some precipitation or clouds that form along it, and probably looking at an increased risk of some wind, and that is especially true across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Looking into Sunday, pockets of rainfall continue for southeast. For Prince William Sound, there's going to be an opportunity for scattered rain and snow throughout the day. We'll see some passing snow showers across the Alaska Range, especially in the west. And around Bristol Bay, watch for some areas of rain and snow showers there. But a lot of that, again, is still an offshore flow. Most likely, we'll be dealing with more and more dry weather coming in from the north, with high pressure taking charge just west of the Gulf of Anadyr. Snow will be developing on the north end and then drying up as it heads southward. Those northerly winds probably pushing in clouds and pockets of occasional moderate rainfall into places like Dutch Harbor and Unalaska all the way out toward Adak and Atka. And you'll notice warmer air is trying to work its way up toward Shemya. The next weather maker there is working its way into the western Bering Sea. Doesn't look terribly strong at this point. For southeast, a southwesterly flow comes into your area. And there's a much better chance of seeing more widespread rainfall as we get toward the end of the weekend. So if you're choosing Saturday or Sunday right now, Sunday looks to be one of the wetter days. Here's a look at the temperatures we saw across Alaska at 4 o'clock. Upper 30s and lower 40s were seen in many areas, all the way from Ketchikan and Annette in the mid to upper 40s, 39 in Hyder. Juneau was looking at temps in the lower 40s. Prince William Sound saw temps in the mid 30s around Valdez and Cordova. We saw temps that were almost 10 degrees apart, in fact, around Seward and Homer. Mid 40s for you, 39 in Kenai, 36 in Anchorage. Squintna and Talkeetna were in the 30s today. Around Fairbanks, Denali, Fort Greely, and Healy, temperatures were in the low to mid-teens. Fort Greely was a little bit milder. Eagle was 8 below, while Northway was looking at 3 degrees above zero. In many areas in southern sections of Yukon were in the low to mid-teens. Areas northward there were a little bit cooler. 5 around Fort Yukon, and if you look northward still, Arctic Village back on the map at 11 below, 16 above around Kaktovik, single digits and low teens there from areas along the Arctic coast. And you'll notice the impact of the wind here. The strong easterly winds are really helping keep temperatures in the milder area with low to mid-teens, and then west of that toward Wainwright we're in the single digits. Point Hope and Point Lay, a little bit different there today. And into Kotzebue Sound, temperatures were in the lower to mid-20s. Shishmaref about 25, Kivalina near 20, and Kotzebue at 25 degrees. Nome holding at 32 by late afternoon, and most of Norton Sound was in the 20s. Around Hooper Bay, we saw 27. About the same there in Bethel. Nunivak Island reported 30. Gamble was 34 there on St. Lawrence Island. Ambler and Bettles in the teens with Tanana at 14 degrees. Down toward McGrath, only 24 degrees. Grayling was 21. Southwest was looking at temps in the low to mid-40s. Dillingham, 43. King Salmon, 46. The Alaska Peninsula saw temperatures in the lower to mid-40s with Sandpoint at 45. False Pass and Cold Bay also in the lower 40s. 39 for both St. Paul and St. George. Adak and Atka were splitting the difference between 40 degrees and 32 way out at Attu. Now, overnight low temperatures, where the wind settles down a little bit, will bottom out pretty quickly across the interior. Most areas are looking at a relatively clear sky north of the Yukon Valley again until you get to the Arctic coast, and that's where the wind will really affect things with blowing and drifting snow. Across the interior, especially the Yukon Flats, up toward Arctic Village, look for temps around 10 to maybe 15 below. South Central, upper 20s and lower 30s. Kodiak, 37. Southeast, you're expecting temperatures in the mid to upper 30s tonight, with some of the warmest regions around Heidelberg to Petersburg out toward Sitka at 39. Yakutat's looking at 33. Southwest, expect lows in the mid to upper 30s, almost 40 degrees in some parts of the Alaska Peninsula. 36 in St. Paul. The central Aleutians will be in the mid 30s. Bethel, probably looking at low to mid teens. Nome, 18 degrees. And if you're in Talkeetna, expect temperatures in the lower 20s. High temperatures tomorrow will struggle to get above freezing for many along the Alaska Range, and north of that, temperatures will easily be in the single digits. You'll be really lucky if you make it to 11 degrees around Healy, 4 below in Fort Yukon, about 3 above in Fairbanks, single digits and low teens for the Arctic coast, 23 in Nome. Southeast, you should expect highs tomorrow in the lower to mid 40s. South Central should see temperatures mainly in the low to mid 30s. Kodiak, 44. The Alaska Peninsula also in the mid 40s. And Dutch Harbor in Alaska also looking at about 44 degrees tomorrow, again with Pribilofs just shy of 40. Here's your flying weather. Expect IFR conditions with the snow and blowing snow across the Arctic coast. Most of that, again, will be improving as we go through the end of the week. Otherwise, MVFR conditions mainly along the north and western sections of the Gulf Coast, southwestern Alaska and the Aleutians, all the way through the Pribilofs. Otherwise, an offshore flow for western Alaska should keep things pretty much in the clear with improving conditions for most of your mountain passes. We're going to call VFR for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass through your Saturday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see improvements quickly in the morning heading for VFR. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass should both be visual through most of the day. Isabel Pass we expect to be VFR. Mentasta Pass should be looking at improvements throughout your Saturday. And Tanita Pass will start out with marginal conditions with improvements to be had through the day. Porter's Pass with a little bit of wind possible. Other than that, VFR conditions are expected through the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see MVFR through a good chunk of your Saturday. Freezing level shows overrunning taking place across the northern sections of southeast, the northern Gulf Coast, and probably south and western Alaska there. Every time that warm air comes up and over the surface freezing line, we have that potential for things like freezing rain. So if there's any precipitation in the area, pilots should take note of this type of pattern. As we look at icing potential, we do see potential below 2,000 feet there with some occasional moderate possible there. So if any chance of precipitation in that region, you're going to watch that carefully. Above 4,000 feet through the central and eastern chain, there's a risk for some occasional moderate there. And also across the Copper River Basin below 6,000 feet, and a smaller area of light to isolated moderate across southern parts of southeast, but that's a little bit higher up above 4,000 feet. Our jet stream shows low pressure working those northerly winds right across the western chain, and then gradually feeding that into that main flow of the jet that's reaching speeds of 150 knots across the central and northern Pacific right into the Pacific Northwest. We also have colder air kind of missing most of Alaska. A lot of that's reaching the Alcan border around Kaktovik and Demarcation Point and working its way into the Northern Territories. As a result, we're losing a lot of that colder air right now, but as the pattern shifts, that's going to bring some colder weather gradually back into western and central parts of Alaska. So at 9,000 feet, we see low pressure over the Alaska Peninsula. That continues with stronger winds to the west around 40 to 50 knots, and a southerly flow across the Gulf of Alaska, 30 to 40 knots there. Across the northern coast, more of an east to westerly flow coming across the Brooks Range summits and the coastline itself, and southwesterlies are coming into southeastern Alaska. At 3,000 feet, a south and westerly flow continues for the Gulf, 20 to about 40 knots here. Low pressure just north of the Alaska Peninsula is guiding in those offshore winds across the YK Delta. Wind speeds there from 25 to as high as 50 knots, though. So don't be surprised to run into some thumps and bumps if you're moving across some of the lower terrain from Bethel northward toward Norton Sound, or even southward toward the Alaska Peninsula. There's sure to be some turbulence issues there. And so we're going to take a look at that. A lot of the wind that we're seeing tonight and tomorrow will be subsiding, especially across the central and northern sections of the interior, but do watch for occasional moderate there, a lot of that below 9,000 feet. And across southwestern Alaska, along and just south of the coastline and south of Bethel, watch for some occasional moderate in the region below 2,000 feet. We'll still see some leftover gusts there and some isolated moderate probably across northern parts of southeast below 6,000 feet. And the Aleutians are still looking at some occasional gusts, which brings us into some light to isolated moderate there for the central and eastern chain. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather.
Good evening, folks. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest is a return guest, J.C. Coffey. J.C. was on last time. He's a retired naval aviator and a very distinguished career, and now is working with NOAA and is doing some pretty neat things with unmanned aircraft. Welcome back, J.C.
Thanks, Harry. It's great to be back.
Let's pick up where we left off. You were talking about some of the missions that you've been flying. How do you see the whole process moving forward? Is it easier to fly the missions up here? About the same? Is it?
Yeah, so I think we're hitting a critical time to introduce this technology into the airspace. The pacing element for years in aviation is propulsion, and because of the power density we can get into batteries or into small gas-powered engines, we're able to do stuff that we weren't able to do on small aircraft in the past. And then it's a command and control. Because of the amount of data and the computing power we can put on these small UASs, the command and control is very safe now. We're able to do what we can never do on a small UAS very, very effectively now. And then finally, the miniaturization of our systems is incredible. I mean, the radars used to be thousands of pounds. Now we got them down to 2 pounds. So we can put a lot of capability on a very small UAS and get observations that required multi-engine, big old aircrafts. And we've been very thoughtful in introducing this technology into the national airspace. And being here in Alaska, this is one of the most interesting places to fly, especially for our environmental folks in the National Weather Service. We want to get environmental intelligence to better protect the people of Alaska from invading weather.
Have you discovered any problems that you would call uniquely Alaskan? Any problems with icing or engine problems?
Yeah, sure.
Battery in the cold problems?
Sure. You look at Alaska and it's vast, and so are the observation requirements. And you need ruggedized platforms to fly in this very challenging environment. And you need very hardy people to fly in this really tough, hardy environment. And we're able to find those folks up here. University of Alaska is cutting edge in this kind of technology. A lot of our contractors and partners up here in both the government sector and in industry are doing things that 10 years we couldn't do up here. And Harry, you've been a big part of that, and thanks for helping us along up here and introducing this technology safely into the airspace.
Well, you're kind to say that, but that brings up a good question. What can we do, because we're all believers in what this can bring, and I think it will make not only our skies safer, but it's going to bring a lot of things that will benefit the people of Alaska, the people of this country. How do we get the word out more than we are right now?
That's right. I think we do a lot of good work in bringing users up here. We reach out, do STEM kind of education up here. But we have to continue to communicate the good things we're doing here. Recently, when we fly here, we always NOTAM and let all our manned aircraft partners know where we're flying. We put together an Alaskan communications plan so that we're able to communicate with everybody else flying in the airspace that we're flying in and let them know we're going to be flying at a certain time, altitudes, things like that. So airspace management has been very critical, but more and more communication is never bad.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that about airspace management. My theory is I'm not worried about mid-air collisions with the people who are playing by the rules. I worry a great deal about the hobbyist who doesn't join the AMA, who just goes down to the hobby store and buys a quadcopter, and then flies like happened a couple months ago in the east-west water lane out at Lake Hood. That's what scares me. It's people that don't take the time to learn the regulations. But thank you for what you do. When are you coming back to Alaska?
I can't come back here enough. And we'll be doing a lot of operations here in the next year. So we're looking forward to doing that. And everything from studying the marginal ice zone and then being able to predict where the ice is so ships can pass and our research vessels can get up there safely, to doing atmospheric work. So we have the whole spectrum of work we're going to do up here and we're looking forward to it.
Any last thoughts?
Yeah, so we talk about the 4 Ds, where we use them, but why we use these things here is because they're efficient, effective, economic, and they're environmentally friendly. So you think emissions flying a 4-engine aircraft that burns 700 gallons per hour out to do these observations, and now we can do a 24-hour observation on a hydrogen fuel cell or a gallon of gas. So we're very thoughtful about how we're introducing this technology, and we want to stress the environmental friendliness of it too.
Well said. Thanks for being on the program.
It's great.
Look forward next time you're in town.
Can't wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. And I want to remind you that it's brought to you by the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, which is a nonprofit, member-supported organization, and it's supported by you through your membership. Membership's only $35 a year, $110 for corporate members, and November will be our membership month. We'll start getting we'll send out letters for new membership for 2015. So I encourage you, please sign up so that we can have programs like this, and also the upcoming November 15th safety seminar. I hope you can all attend. And until next time, fly safe.
Here's a quick peek at sea surface temperatures, and if you can find all these areas here in dark blue, these are temps that are running about -1 or so, and once again, as soon as those winds quit across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, our sea ice desk experts tell us that ice, anything that is shallow or thin or a little bit of open water there, will quickly freeze over, and that probably includes areas in Norton Sound and along the southwestern coast as well. So watch for some changes there. Here's a look at the current ice edge at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. You can see there is a lot of ice there, but a lot of it really isn't terribly thick right now across the northern coast. Across the Chukchi Seacoast into Kotzebue Sound and along the southern Seward Peninsula coastline into parts of Norton Sound and the northern sections of the YK Delta, and a little bit of ice there as you get into the Kuskokwim Delta region. Other than that, we'll watch for some changes just like you are, and you can check on this anytime you want by going to the webpage you see there. Here's a look at southeastern Alaska now. South and easterly winds will be working through the inner waterways and the coastal areas, generally around 20 knots or so. One exception would be around the Lynn Canal at 10 knots. 3-foot seas there, 4-foot seas elsewhere on the inside, 12 to 13-foot seas along the coast. As we get into Saturday, very little change in direction or speed. Winds may come up a little bit more for the central inner waterways up through the Lynn Canal, 15 knots with 3 to 4-foot seas there on the inside, and 11 to 15-foot seas along coastal areas by Sunday. Across south central, easterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 3-foot sea. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, 15 to 20 knots. A southerly flow on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Easterlies inside of Shelikof Strait at 15 knots, with southeasterlies just east of the Barren Islands around 20 knots with a 10-foot sea. For Sunday, the winds are about the same there across the north and western Gulf. Easterlies continue inside of Prince William Sound around 15 knots, with northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet around 15 to 20 knots. And west of the Barrens, 5-foot seas on a 20-knot wind from the east. Across the Alaska Peninsula, easterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 5-foot sea on 25 knots. Northeasterlies north of Cold Bay. On the Pacific side, you're looking at 20 to 25 knots with 14-foot seas there, generally from the south and southwest. By Sunday, look for the winds to switch a little bit across the southern Alaska Peninsula, coming in from the north and west. As low pressure is still hovering in your area, we'll have northeasterly winds across Bristol Bay and southerlies from Castle Cape to Chignik with 20 knots there on an 11-foot sea. Across the Aleutians, north and westerly winds continue around 25 to 30 knots. The lightest winds there just south of Unalaska and Nikolsky and out across Attu at 25 knots with a 10-foot sea there in the west. And seas on the Bering side running from 12 to 14 feet with 11 to 13-foot seas there in the Pacific. Very little change for Sunday. Low pressure is pretty much in the same spot, and that'll keep things pretty much status quo for you. A few changes out in the west, though, from Kiska to Attu. Look for 25 to 30-knot winds. More of a southerly flow around Shemya and more of a westerly flow around Kiska with 9 to 11-foot seas there. Otherwise, things are just about the same for Sunday. For the west coast, A northeasterly flow coming off the west coast there, about 25 to 40 knots. Freezing spray is going to be an issue anywhere along the ice edge. Northerlies for St. Matthew along the Pribilofs, 25 to 30 knots there from the north with 11 to 13-foot seas. And as I learned out in Dutch Harbor in Unalaska last week, the right thing to say when the map doesn't change is no change, because that's how Reuben used to do it. So that's how we'll try and do it from now on. Freezing spray is still an issue north of St. Lawrence Island as well over the open water. And once again, no change. Out across the Arctic coast, an easterly flow, a little bit stronger there, north of Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse to Kaktovik, 30 to 35 knots. The wind should be diminishing a little bit more and a little bit more throughout the rest of the day. Northerlies from Cape Lisburne to Point Hope down through Kotzebue Sound, about 20 to 25 knots, and 5-foot seas there out around the Chukchi Sea coast itself. Again, very little change there, not quite no change, but a very little change north of Point Lay, 15 knots there over the ice, and the winds are coming down just a little bit more from Barrow to Prudhoe to Kaktovik, about 20 to 30 knots. So every little bit's going to make a little bit more difference there in your day for Sunday. Northerly still coming over the Chukchi Sea coast with 7-foot seas on a 20 to 25 knot wind. Now recapping tonight's weather, rain will focus on the Gulf Coast areas, a little bit less rain for southeast tonight compared to what's coming your way on Sunday. Around the Cook Inlet, pockets of rain and snow may mix, and a few snow showers at elevation. Most likely, though, the more steadier precipitation will be across southwest and the central and eastern chain. Most of the interior is going to be pretty dry, and gusty winds prevail with winter weather advisories for the central Beaufort Seacoast, and wind advisories will continue for parts of the interior, generally north and west of Fairbanks through the overnight hours and into early Saturday morning, with gusts there from 35 to 45 miles per hour in most places, and again mainly on the ridge tops. Snow showers will pick up across some of the Alaska range, and a better chance of rainfall on Sunday for southeast, and things will dry up a little bit more in the west. Have a good weekend. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.